Hi, everybody. Welcome to the ninth episode of Conceptualism. I'm very pleased to have with me here today Dinuk WIjeratne, who is a composer, a pianist, and a conductor. But he's also many more things. He's a creative consultant. He is a genre-bending, crossing, improviser who does all kinds of strange things for a classical musician. Collaborates with DJs, tabla players. It's remarkable, and I'm honored to have you here with me today. So thank you for agreeing to do this.
Thanks for having me, Afraz.
So I guess I want to start out by asking you about your formative years. Growing up in Dubai, and what kind of music was in your mind? What were you listening to? Who were your early influences?
Well, it was a very interesting childhood, and I'm sure you know I was born in Sri Lanka, but my parents immigrated to Dubai when I was 4. There was a huge influx of talent and expertise from the rest of the world, particularly the Asian subcontinent. So we went there when I was 4 years old, and I say it was a fascinating childhood because unless anything has changed, in Dubai, what's peculiar about it is that everyone exists on work visas.
Right.
You know? So, so essentially what this means is you grow up there knowing that you will have to leave because you're not a citizen, right?
Yes.
So I think everyone has this kind of strangely embedded feeling of transition,
Hmm.
right? You know that there's a whole chapter of your life that's still in transition.
Right.
And I think that shapes you in an interesting way, so that's one thing. The second thing is that it's a melting pot of cultures, which is just fabulous. And I just love that. And I remember at one point in my high school class, there were 13 students and 10 different nationalities, you know, and I was receiving a totally Western education, but I was in a Middle Eastern country where a lot of the music I heard was not only Arabic music, but also um, Indian music, South Indian, North Indian, and also Qawwali and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so it really was terrific in a sense that you grew up without a sense of bias, I think, artistically.
Hmm.
and and then of course, when you leave home, you that's when you actually paradoxically want to discover it. You want to go back to some of those influences.
Right.
So I should mention that, I mean, this was in the 80s and the 90s, right? I was a kid, and there was really no youth orchestra, whereas here you can just join a youth orchestra if you want,
Yes.
pretty much. And it was not the digital age. So I spent all of my pocket money on music magazines and recordings, which were not recommended to me, in the sense that I had to pretty much judge a recording by the quality of its cover, and so I was just buying stuff left, right, and center.
Yeah.
um, in a sense, blind, but it was good that no one was saying you should listen to this or you shouldn't listen to this.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
So was
so
it was
one
it
day
was
it
it
was Mozart. Yeah,
was it
one day it was Mozart. The other day it was Miles Davis or something like that.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And like, were you buying records, like vinyl records or CDs or tapes, or what was it? What was the?
No, I'm afraid I haven't been bitten by the vinyl bug, even though I really respect its quality.
Yeah.
So I'm still a CD kid, as you can see.
Yes.
I will not. I just love um, I just love, listening to the CD while taking out the sleeve and reading everything.
Right. So you're a consummate. I mean, like we're all of us music nerds. We'll read the linear notes, and we'll read like who is on the recording, and just like research them and research like what kind of stuff they do. And I think that's amazing, because like when you get a digital download, that sometimes you don't get that information. You just it's just a track. You don't get all
I
that.
know, I know. And so now I only buy digital if I get the little PDF.
Right.
I just have to, yeah, I guess, one just wants a little bit of information. I love backstories about the recordings.
Right.
Um, you know, I still buy DVDs and Blu-rays because you get the special features. How can you
Right.
not have the special features?
That's amazing. That's so cool. And you're also a self-professed tabla aficionado, tabla nerd, and I think you told us when we met for the first time at Lamp that you think that you might have played tabla in a past life.
Yeah, I'm pretty much convinced. I mean, there are great tabla players, colleagues of mine, who have told me, yes, you must have been a tabla player in a previous life. But I should tell you that while I know a lot about tabla, I cannot physically play it. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
because you need another lifetime to do that.
That's right. Yeah, it does. It takes a lifetime. It does. It takes a lifetime. Um, and people devote their whole lives to that instrument, and it's like and there's, I mean, it's like every day, it's a learning experience, because some people will see just two drums, but what they don't realize is that there's like virtually an infinite number of possible ways to combine the sounds, and you could probably make on the drum like between 20 to 30 different sounds, like, on the drums combined together, and there's all like there's na, there's da, there's all the different combinations of sounds that you can make. um and I
It's
think
incredibly coloristic for,
for yeah.
relative to how innocent it looks.
Yes, yes, and it has that special black paste, which gives it a resonance which very few other
Hmm.
drums have. It sounds almost
The
like a bell.
spot, yes.
It sounds like a bell because it has all those overtones which you don't really expect from a drum.
Yes, yes, the little spot in the middle, and it looks so beautiful too.
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to ask you about your composition with the Afaria Quartet and DJ Scratch Bastard, and I wanted to ask you about when you took on that project, and obviously you're working with a DJ. There's that idea of remixing a remix, but when you started writing the piece, did you do it with all that remixing like imagined, or did you just do it like almost like a blank canvas, and then you just let it become whatever like it was gonna become,
I think
like did
more
you
like the
experiment?
latter.
The
More
latter.
like the latter.
Okay.
So, um, just to give your listeners some context, so this was a project I believe I started writing in 2015,
Okay.
and I was very fortunate that the stage one of the project, the acoustic pieces, I won the Juno for in 2016.
Yes.
But it was actually a three-stage project that the Afiara Quartet designed, and I should mention the stages were very ingeniously designed, because they approached the composers and they said, the first premise is string quartet music inspired by pop,
Right.
right?
Right.
In any way that you like,
Uh-huh.
okay?
Uh-huh.
But we're going to go one step further, and we're going to take your material and then give it to Scratch Bastard, the DJ.
Right.
And then, this happens and people remix stuff, acoustic music. But they said, we're going to go a stage further, which is we're going to take his remix and give it back to you
Right.
so that you can write some kind of acoustic DJ hybrid piece. Doesn't have to be very long. And my hybrid piece was only 5 minutes long. It's a kind of little party piece, fun party piece, right?
Right.
But because of the three stages, we got quite a lot of footage. And my acoustic pieces ended up being, I think, 14 minutes long in two parts.
Hmm.
And it's called Two Pop Songs on Antique Poems.
Yes.
And I called it that because I just thought, well, if this is about celebrating something contemporary, in a sense that, you're being inspired by pop, um, could you allow for some tension when innovation rubs up against tradition?
Yes.
you know and I think through the ages, you could have so much fun in art with the tension between tradition and innovation, right? You can just do whatever you want with that. And
Yes.
so in my case, it was, I loved digging into some old poems for inspiration, poems that were hundreds of years old, and
Yes.
then just infusing a couple of classical quotes, like there are two quotes from Schubert, Death and the Maiden. because I just thought that the opening of Death and the Maiden sounded awesome on the turntables, right? So, so yeah, so there are two acoustic pieces, a remix, and then what they call the re-remix.
That's so cool. I like that. That's brilliant. That's amazing. And I guess like the the idea of taking something, you know, and then putting it through all these different processes and seeing what happens as a result of the process, like it's really interesting because one of my heroes is Brian Eno, and what he does is he creates music that's based on these processes. He almost makes machines that create these artistic results, you know. So
Absolutely.
so you're
What a genius. Yes.
brilliant. It's amazing, and that's what your project reminded me of, because it was like it was almost a machine. You were putting it through this conceptual process based machine, and then it was coming up with these results that you know that, well, I mean, you can anticipate them sort of because you're obviously the maker, but they also probably surprised you because you're like, I didn't expect this. Like this is what a turntable is doing, you know, in this instance. And like, because obviously Scratch Bastille would have been improvising as well, so there was probably, unless you scored the whole thing, I don't know, but like there's these elements of chance almost in the music, you know.
Of course, of course. And I have to say, I was part of a great team. It was an amazing team effort, and I think it reminds you, um, just because the project had a lot of success for everyone, and they were able to tour all over the place with the project.
Yeah,
It just reminds you that you want to be in a good team, and you want to give each other a lot of freedom and flexibility, and they were so good at creating an atmosphere of fun and discovery.
yeah,
you know that just goes such a long way.
it does, it really does. And you know, I think as well, you know, intuition is so important, you know, like allowing your inner child to come through, you know, to say, you know, this is so cool, like, you know, and kind of have that enthusiasm, and like you said, that fun environment, because that makes all the difference when you're having fun. Then you know, it's like that atmosphere allows everybody to feel comfortable. It's a safe space.
Absolutely.
And
And I
that's so
think that
important in a creative situation, to feel.
absolutely, I think the way you phrase it, a safe space, that's a great term to use. I use that a lot. Also, the speaking of the sense of fun, um, when you're a lone creator and you spend time in a room like this, just doing your thing with the door closed,
Yes,
you're trying to get back to a sense of fun that you had when you were a kid.
yes,
You know, uh, you're certainly trying to tap into all of your technique and acquired intellectualism. There's no doubt about that. But
yes,
you're trying to combine that with the same sense of fun that you had when you were a kid, and that's tricky.
indeed, indeed. So how much does aleatoric and chance based processes play a part in your creative process? Like, um, obviously, people like John Cage and you know and Lamonti Young, you know, sort of embody this school of chance based music making. I was wondering how much that plays into your practice.
I mean, in the way that those composers have used it, I mean, um, I'm not using it the same way.
Right?
And I had the immense privilege of studying with John Corigliano,
Yes.
and he is so incredible at creating sonorities and textures in his music, um, using kind of chance elements that are very controlled, like Lutosławski.
Right.
Um, and I just typically don't do much of that. However, because I get to work with a lot of improvisers, I'm constantly thinking of how you could sort of marry certain chance-based approaches from the improviser's perspective.
Right. And I mean, you're also an improviser. You're you know, you have a practice of improvising on
Hmm.
on the keyboard, on the piano, and on synthesizers as well. So um so I mean, in that sense, like, I'm sure your playing also informs your composing. No.
Oh, of course. And even when I'm writing, I have a piece for piano trio, Love Triangle for the Griffin Trio, and
Yes.
they're not improvisers, but that piece is hugely influenced by the improviser's mindset, you know. And again, I would say it's a fundamental preoccupation of my music. I just love that tension between what's composed and what's improvised.
Yes.
Essentially,
That's great.
what's premeditated and what's spontaneous.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm constantly looking for ways, even if people are there to play every single note that's on the page, how could you write in a way where they sound like improvisers, shall we say?
Yes. And I wanted to ask you about the tabla concerto that you wrote. You know, you had a chance to work with Zakir Hussain and also Sandeep Das. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to ask you, like, um, what was the what wa- like when obviously every time you work with a different tabla player, you know, they're going to bring their own unique approach to the way that it's played. So like how did you hear, like, what were the differences between their approaches, and like and because obviously you can't completely compose every part for the tabla, because it's hard to write down all the notations, although there are people that are working on it. There's a guy called Dan Weiss who's a drummer and tabla player who's transcribed tabla notations for the drum kit, you know.
Yes, I know Dan actually, and it so happens that his notation was the notation I used for my tabla concerto.
Well, there you go.
So essentially, the tabla part looks like a drum kit part,
Yes, yes,
and I'm quite used to that. And now my colleague Sean Matavetsky, who's a very fine tabla player
yes, the
in
McGill,
Montreal,
at McGill.
he's come up with his own tabla notation. And anyone who's interested in writing uh, tabla music from a sort of Western standpoint would do well to check out, Sean's notation. But my tabla concerto, I have to tell you, is actually pretty much notated.
Okay, okay.
So, and it just happened that way because the first tabla player I was collaborating with, rather the tabla player who gave the premiere, Ed Hanley,
Yeah,
said, I think it would be a good idea to actually have it more notated, right?
right.
Because he said, this is a classical piece and you want it the way you want it.
Mhm,
So go for it.
right.
And I did that. And so now I think there are about 5 tabla players who have this piece in their repertoire, which is amazing.
That's incredible.
And I kind of have now verbal discussions with them about where they want a little bit of freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Um, sorry, I'm just getting all these calls. Can I just take a second here to let them know that this is a bad time?
Sure, you can just clip this out.
Yeah, I will.
You're a busy guy, in demand.
Not as much as you, Dinuk, I wish. um, all right, good. Now I turned off my phone, so I shouldn't be disturbed. Um,
Yeah.
so I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you about. Oh God, no. What was I gonna say? This totally derailed my chain of thought.
Oh, that's okay. We were talking about tabla concerto.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So your composition Invisible Cities, you know, and you know, you've done some work for multi percussion, you know, and I think that's really interesting because you incorporate a lot of polyrhythms, you know, which as you know are heavily featured and used in African music. Um, and so I grew up listening to polyrhythms. So when I listen to your compositions, it always blows my mind how you're able to achieve this polyrhythmic complexity, you know, notating it down, because normally that complexity comes from everybody improvising their part, you know, and from people doing this back and forth and like knowing what their part should be. Like, so it's incredible that you've managed to get this richness into Western notation. That's amazing. I haven't heard that anywhere else.
Yes, and I think you're probably thinking of that movement in the middle called Chloe, which seems to be everyone's favorite. Um, and I was very much influenced by Senegalese drumming,
Amazing.
which I think is just fabulous. If I had another lifetime, I would I would go there and spend half a year or something, right? And but it just to say, it is possible, sort of, to notate that stuff, but what Western notation will never give you is any way to capture the feel and the, I mean, how do you define the word feel, right? Feel is um, the kind of personality of the way they play the rhythms
The
that
rhythm
cannot.
is like it's that it's like the pocket, that some drummers will call it that, the pocket. It's like
Yes,
that's those spaces, that tension, that
yes.
yeah.
You can't capture that, and so all you can do is hope that you have great musicians who understand that sensibility and are willing to go there.
Right, and that's a classic example of when the score needs to be taken off the page and injected with that life that comes from a great musician really understanding beyond just
Absolutely,
the notation.
absolutely.
Yeah. Dinuk, I wanted to ask you about your style and your sartorial, panache. Like, for example, the outfit that you wore to the Junos, like, that's so cool. And like, and being a conductor, being a performer, like, what you wear is so important. So I wanted to ask you about that. What informs your style? Yeah, where does that come from?
Well, actually, for conductors, that sort of narrow jacket style is now actually very popular, even for
Oh,
Western conductors.
it's in vogue. Yes.
And I particularly like it not only because I'm South Asian, but I have to tell you, I just never liked Western concert tails. I just no, can't do it.
This
You
is
know,
sacrilegious.
partic-
This is
particularly
sacrilegious,
with
Dinuk.
my frame, I'm just going to look like Jiminy Cricket. So I just thought, no, no, I'm not doing that. I need an alternative. So I have I have a number of those jackets, and I really love conducting in them.
Yeah. They're absolutely, yeah, they're so beautiful. um and I was going to ask you, like, when you're moving your arms around when you're conducting, like, do those jackets allow you to do that? Like, you feel like it's comfortable to conduct with that?
Uh, Actually, depend. Wow, that's a really good question. Um, like that's a very astute kind of nuanced question about expert tailoring. Um, and I think the answer is it depends on how expertly tailored it is.
Right.
So some of them, I do have a couple. I have two that I wore at my wedding, which I love because they were made really well.
Yeah.
But I think they were made to look good at a wedding, not to conduct, not to conduct. So yes, congratulations. That's a very expert question about those jackets.
And do you ever write by hand? Do you ever, like, notate, using a fountain pen, or like, or just a pencil, or is it everything done like by MIDI keyboard, or like in the computer?
I love pencils and pens only at the sketch stage.
Got you. Got you.
So, and that's because now if you hand music in a Western context to a musician, they're expecting it to be
Yes.
computer printed.
Yes. Yes.
Um, so I do go fairly quickly to that stage.
Mhm.
However, what I would say to young composers is do not go quickly to that stage. You know, because you can be shackled by the equipment and the technology and the software that you use.
Right.
So I like to stay as long as I can in this kind of, again, it's this kind of play state of just having a pencil scratch against a page.
Yes.
And even my colleague.
There's a tactileness. There's a sensory, like a sensory input that you don't get when you're doing it on the computer.
Exactly. And you could argue that even to see staff paper with the 5 lines
Mhm.
could even shackle you a little bit. Like if the page was blank, when you're just kind of getting your ideas,
Yeah.
that's even better,
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. Because then you can do those mind maps and the little bubbles and, like, and little trails, of text going back and forth, and you don't have
Yeah,
to.
you could sketch the bird's eye view of your piece if you
Yes.
like.
Yes.
You know, you could do a lot of things because essentially you're making parallels between something that's visual and something that's sonic.
Yes. Yes.
you know. An idea is just a shape that's manipulated. And you could think of a sound idea as some kind of visual idea.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I mean, one case that's particularly obvious is in film scoring. You know,
Mhm.
where the sounds are meant to go with particular visual scenes and sequences. You know, or even with dance, like, you know, if you're playing with a dancer. I saw this beautiful picture of you and Maria Osende together, the dancer who,
Flamenco dancer.
yeah, flamenco dancer, that's right. And you know, that's like a beautiful example where music is such a visual thing, and it's a tactile thing, you know, even.
It is very much, very much. I think the more ways you can think of music in other terms, in
Yes.
across disciplines, the better
Right.
off your
An
creativity will
interdisciplinary
be.
approach. Yeah, music. Yeah, music is definitely an interdisciplinary thing. You know, even for example, the idea of the old bards who used to go around, you know, singing poetry and playing music, like language and literature, and you know, like Bob Dylan received the literature Nobel Prize, and I think that was brilliant because, you know, like that just goes to show you that music is attached to all these disciplines. You know, even science, like cymatics. I don't know if you've ever heard about cymatics, the visual representation of sound. I'll send you a video, like where music or tones affect like water, sand, fire. You know, like for example, the Dubai dancing fountains that are choreographed with music, like
Oh, yes,
that's a beautiful example of like cymatics in action. You know,
absolutely.
so the possibilities are endless. And I wanted to ask you like about unconventional notation or graphic scores, or you know, things like this. Do you is that part of your practice at all, or you know, are have you ever experimented with that kind of unconventional notation?
I have experimented in it. I mean, I confess that, like, in terms of what I hand to the musicians who are playing my stuff, it isn't a part of my language.
Fair enough.
But you know, just to go back to that headspace of what you do in the sketch stage,
Mm,
I think there's immense power in that kind of graphic notation that follows its own rules, you know.
yes. And then there's also the idea of, you know, using open-ended or philosophical prompts, like for example Brian Eno's oblique strategies, you know, where there's things like use an unqualified person, reverse, you know, shut the door, things like that, you know, where these kinds of philosophical or open-ended prompts will then lead you in a certain direction, you know.
Yes, and I, you know, I should tell you about one someone I'm a huge fan of. I'm a huge fan of this author Edward de Bono, who wrote the book Lateral Thinking.
Ah, okay.
And so he wrote, you know, his books on creativity primarily for a business and a science and tech audience,
Mm,
right? But essentially he's just talking about the concepts of creativity, and they just apply to anything.
right.
And so what you're speaking about these prompts is, you know, you're trying to keep your perspective and your idea generation loose by imposing kind of random stimulation of ideas,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Things. So the suggestions you had, you know, from Brian Eno, just kind of serve to jog your mind into some kind of different idea generation,
Yes. Yeah,
and I think that's great.
like when you're in a studio and it's costing you thousands of dollars an hour and the ideas suddenly run dry and you're like, ah, crap, what am I gonna do? And then it's like you pull out one of these cards and it tells you,
Yes,
you know, to tape your mouth shut. And you know, you're in the middle of a studio and you're like, tape my mouth shut, how's that gonna help?
exactly. Exactly. You can get an idea from anywhere. You know, it's a question of how do you make the connection, right?
Definitely, I 100% agree, 100% agree. That was my mom.
Oh, okay. Say hello.
Yeah, I will. So I guess I wanted to ask you about Tibetan singing bowls. Have you ever considered using singing bowls in any of your compositions? Um,
I was very close to using one, and I wasn't convinced it was the pitch and the quality I wanted.
Fair enough.
But I think if I had a slightly better one, I would have used it.
Yeah,
They're beautiful. They really are.
they are. They really are. Yeah. And also on that vein, gongs. I've always loved gongs. You
Oh
know,
yeah.
And like I think the world's largest gong is like at a temple somewhere in China, and it's something like 10 feet wide. Like, can you imagine the frequencies that are coming off of that?
Oh yes, and the overtones and the resonance,
It's like remarkable, you know?
amazing.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this, Dinuk. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'll let you know as soon as it's uploaded.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Yeah. Stay creative and take care and stay safe. Most importantly,
You as well. You as well, Dinuk. Okay, bye.
take care, Afraz.